What I'd like to do in the time I have with you is give you an update about the state of the industry, a sort of bird's eye view, if you will, of what does the regenerative medicine sector look like and what are some of the trends that we're seeing at this point in the year. So I'd like to cover, sorry, I have to do this to know exactly where I am. I'd like to cover kind of 4 areas when I describe the state of the industry for you. The first is to talk a little bit about the clinical progress that we've seen. Then I'd like to touch on some of the anticipated clinical data events that we're expecting this year. Then I'll talk a little bit about the sector's financial performance and the success that we've had as an industry in attracting the resources that we need to continue the pace of development. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the policy environment that we find ourselves in. And for those of you who like charts and data, all of what I'm about to show will be available on our website or through our Twitter feed later, so to simplify your picture taking and note taking. So first, for those of you who may not be familiar with ARM, ARM is the only international advocacy organization that's specifically focused on the issues of regenerative medicine. And by regenerative medicine, we mean gene therapy, cell therapy, and tissue engineering. We are a member organization with 290 plus members, companies, patient organizations, academic members, and we're focused on really 5 key goals. The first goal is advocating for a clear and predictable regulatory environment for these therapies. And as you can see, Dr. Gottlieb spoke quite extensively about that a minute ago. The second goal is to enable market access and value-based reimbursement policies, while also trying to address the industrialization and manufacturing challenges that we also discussed over lunch. ARM devotes a good deal of attention to key stakeholder outreach, communication, and education, including the compilation of the kind of data I'm about to share with you, which we collect in an annual report once a year and update quarterly. And then lastly, we facilitate fundraising and access to capital on behalf of our members. So the current landscape for regenerative medicine companies has us tracking 866 companies around the globe. As you can see from this map, about 50% of the sector is located in the United States, but we have significant pockets of activity also in the EU and in Asia. These companies cover a broad range of therapeutic platforms and enabling technologies. I won't read through this exhaustive list except to say, as you can see, including advanced cells, cell-based immunotherapies, novel and synthetic gene delivery vehicles, genome editing, and next-generation expression constructs. So the major clinical news of this sector is obviously that we have entered the market and we have had successful commercialization with 3 products entering the market in the US in 2017, and a 4th approved in Korea. Already this year, we have had 2 additional approvals for Tygenix allogeneic stem cell therapy in Europe, and a second indication for Novartis's Kymriah. The clinical trial pipeline behind these approvals is robust and growing, and it's grown considerably since last year. As you can see here, we're tracking 318 phase 1 trials, that's up 18% from last year, 541 phase 2 trials, up 5% from last year, and 93 phase 3 trials, where we see the biggest increase, up 37% from last year. Just to dive into these a little bit by technology type, you can see here that gene therapy, gene-modified cell therapy, and cell therapy all have approximately the same number of trials underway, but gene therapy and cell therapy have considerably more products in phase 2. phase 3. These trials cover a wide range of indications and therapeutic categories. You can see that oncology trials dominate, with more than 500 trials across a variety of cancer types. Cardiovascular is the next most common indication addressed in these trials, followed by musculoskeletal and CNS. We at ARM regularly track anticipated data events in the regenerative medicine sector, and this is just a small portion of that. Here what I'm showing are late stage human trials and expected regulatory events for 2018. And again, you can see that they cross a variety of indications, geographies, companies, and technology types. If you're interested in more data like this, the full list of anticipated data events for 2018 is available on the ARM website. Turning to the sector's finances, 2017 was a remarkable year, and 2018 looks to be even better. As you can see here, we've already, at this point in the year, seen $5.6 billion investment flow into this sector. That's a 141% increase over last year, where we were at $2.3 billion at this point in the process. Looking at the sort of subcomponents of that, in the gene-based therapy sector has raised $4.6 billion, 210% more than this point last year, led by Bluebird's raise of $651 million. In the cell therapy category, $2.8 billion has flowed into the sector, also a significant increase over last year, with Iovance raising $172 million in a public offering as one example of the activity in that space. In the tissue engineering world, you see the largest percentage growth, in large part due to the $250 million venture financing of Cellularity. Looking a little deeper at the nature of these financings, you can see that in many of these kind of subcomponents, we have surpassed or are close to surpassing the levels of the full year last year already at this point, not quite a full 5 months into the year. So corporate partnerships have been particularly active. You sort of know this from reading your news feed, that there are a whole bunch of interesting partnerships taking place now, both on the research side, such as the Kite and Sangamo partnership around engineered cell therapies for oncology, but also on the commercialization side, such as the Spark and Novartis agreement for Novartis to market Spark's Luxturna outside the United States. Private placements have also been active, with Rubis, CarsGen, and Tessa having significant investments. And the follow-on secondary public market has been on fire, with 10 $100 million plus financings just so far this year. I mentioned Bluebirds. We have Avexis also raised $431 million in January. Adentis raised $231 million in January. Sangamo raised $230 million, and the list goes on. We've had 4 IPOs so far this year, and the venture capital market has also been very strong, most notably with the Allogene $300 million Series A deal announced just last month. On the M&A side of things, it was an interesting year last year, and this year is also proving to be an interesting year. We've already seen the Celgene acquisition of Juno, Astellas acquiring Universal Cells, and this data, of course, closed May 14th, so on May 15th, the Novartis-Avexis deal closed, to throw off our graph, but that's another $8.7 billion already into the 2018 bar on this chart, and we know that there are other deals, obviously, in the works for this year, so the M&A environment is very healthy. This is sort of a summation of some of the major corporate partnerships and public financings in this space. I've mentioned several of them already, but to highlight a few more, we show here the REGENXBIO Avexis amended a license agreement around SMA development, and AbbVie's partnership with Voyager in the CNS neurodegenerative space. Altogether, definitely a sign of investor enthusiasm for the work that the people in this room and your colleagues are doing, and the potential that the products that are under development have to make it to market and to reach patients. The policy environment is clearly an important part of that. For those of you who were here at lunch, you heard Dr. Gottlieb, I think, communicate his unabashed enthusiasm for the space and its promise, and more importantly, when I introduced Dr. Gottlieb, I mentioned that he's responsible for drugs and devices and food and cosmetics, because I think it makes it all that much more remarkable how focused he is on our space, how much he knows about it, how deeply involved he is, the expertise that he has, and the energy that he brings to it, given the enormous remit that the FDA commissioner has. So we have the benefit right now of a very supportive regulatory policy environment. He spoke about some of the RMAT designations. I think for those of us who have been in Washington, the pace of implementation of the RMAT designation is sort of head-spinning and remarkable. We were so pleased at the evolution, too, of the clarification that RMAT designation would cover gene therapies and gene editing, as we hoped it would when it was passed. We haven't talked too much today about the European environment, but we feel that the regulatory policy environment in Europe is also quite supportive of the industry right now, and part of the feeling of optimism that we're seeing. The RMAT designation, I think, probably is fairly well known to most of you in this room, but in case not, it does guarantee certain interactions with the FDA. It gives you eligibility for priority review and accelerated approval, and gives you some flexibility in your data and the number of clinical sites used for your submission data. It has been implemented primarily since early 2017. The commissioner noted that there are now 19 products that have received RMAT designation. Only 16 of those have been publicly announced. We don't quite know why the other 3 are hiding out the fact that they've received their RMAT designation, but for whatever reason, they haven't publicly announced themselves, and the FDA doesn't do it. So we know the numbers, and these are the 16 who have self-identified as having received the designation. A majority of these, as he noted, are in the rare disease space, but they cross a number of indications and technologies. In addition to the 19 approvals, they have clarified for us that there have been 62 applicants for the RMAT designation, 19 approved, and of those, 14 are rare disease. Needless to say, the commercialization activity in our sector and the fact that the regulatory environment is so good right now in the United States has caused us to turn our attention as ARM and as a community pretty significantly to the challenges of market access and reimbursement. I think we have in this room examples of ARM as an alliance is working to drive necessary change to enable new payment models in the reimbursement landscape, particularly for U.S. public payers. And Spark and Novartis are also working closely and have publicly disclosed their own conversations with CMS to drive new kinds of thinking and to enable new payment models like annuity payments, which are so essential for products of the kind that we're producing. We're actively involved with CMS on a proposed inpatient rule to sort of think about whether we can change the nature of the reimbursement system as it affects CAR T therapies, so that what's now a very has a product with a lot of clinical impact can also be a good business to be in. So ARM's strategic focus areas, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning. Here's just a bit more detail about what we're focused on over the course of this year. In the regulatory environment, we're working with the FDA and the EMA and compiling all of the relevant guidances that affect cell and gene therapy in order to identify those things, particularly in the manufacturing domain, where updates to guidances are necessary. Dr. Gottlieb spoke some about this, and we have already commented a few times on two manufacturing and standards-related guidances from the agency, but as he indicated, there'll be more work to be done there. On the reimbursement side, ARM is developing principles of an ARM-endorsed global value framework and is actively involved in advocacy along with our member companies to secure any legislative and regulatory changes needed to enable these new payment models. On the manufacturing and industrialization side of things, we continue to work to reduce standards, technical and regulatory barriers to the scale-up of RMAT therapies. So I think the key takeaways from our look at this sector are that we have at this point a very, very supportive policy environment. There is work to be done for sure, but it's hard to imagine having better partners in the course of doing that work. The sector continues to see very, very strong scientific data with potential for positive widespread patient impact and significant near-term late-stage anticipated clinical events. Sustained investor interest probably doesn't really do what we're seeing out there justice. We held a meeting in New York to showcase companies active in this space with the investment community there, and we had a sort of a sold-out crowd this year, the largest crowd we've ever had. The amount of investor interest we see and investor inquiries we get for this space continues to grow every day. And we continue to see that there are commercialization challenges and opportunities, both in manufacturing and in market access, but that these seem to be obstacles and barriers that we can overcome and to take advantage of the promise of the sector. So thank you very much. What we're going to do now is move on to a panel discussion. I'm not sure if we have our moderator here. Yes. Come on up. Let me introduce. Sure, I would. I'm sorry. Yes.
Dr. Gottlieb and you have emphasized, and I thought very compellingly in both cases, the importance of this focus on manufacturing and standardization.
Mm-hmm.
And you even mentioned it in terms of pre-competitive environment. And I'm wondering if the Alliance has had discussions with him or members of the industry about concern a lot of us have as we proceed with gene therapy with various vectors owned by various people, and if it's not a standardized pre-competitive manufacturing process, who's going to own the vectors? How do we avoid the legal train wreck that's going to disrupt and obstruct access by our patients to these wonderful therapies being developed because no one's willing to give up the rights to the vectors?
Right. So ARM's activity in this space, we incubated something called the Standards Coordinating Body, which was an effort to bring together multiple stakeholders who cared about some of the kind of analytics and measurement that might underlie some of these CMC requirements. That sort of is now established as an independent organization with its own board. It's supported by the FDA, actually has contracted with this organization to do standards education and evolution in the space. We have not engaged particularly on the issue of the IP around the vectors and the legal issues on that domain. But we have had a set of preliminary conversations with the FDA about what are some of the updates that are needed in this the technical updates that are needed about the guidance and the framework as they present it. Is Maury Ruffin here? I don't know if Maury, do you want to add anything to that? Maury leads the Science and Technology Committee at ARM and the manufacturing work we do. Here, use this one.
No, but Ron, that's a great question, and as Janet said, in terms of the pre-competitive work, I mean, that's something we clearly support, and the work of the standards coordinating body is really dedicated to that. There is project work going on under the auspices of the Science and Technology Committee to look at some of these issues around vectors and vector manufacturing. And I think, I think obviously we want vector to be available to everyone as they're developing these products, because we want these products to get to the patient. So, I think that, that is a conversation that has to take place in this space. But we encourage anybody, who has concerns about that to join this effort. The task force that we have working on this, and especially around some of the work we're doing as it relates to vectors, is an open activity, and we have a number of volunteers who are helping us with that. And we would actually, it would be great to have you and some of the people you're working with join that effort too.
So stop asking questions.
No.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yes. Welcome to the association world. Any other comments, questions before we